the interrelationship between enlightenment and liberation in Buddhist traditions. Introduction within the vast and nuanced landscape of Buddhist philosophy. The concepts of enlightenment, bodhi, and liberation, vimutti, moksha, nirvana, stand as central pillars of spiritual realization. At first glance, they may appear synonymous, both pointing toward the transcendence of suffering and the attainment of ultimate truth. Yet, as Buddhist traditions developed across Asia, subtle distinctions arose regarding how enlightenment and liberation are defined, related, and actualized. In early Buddhist contexts, enlightenment was often described as the insight into the Four Noble Truths, while liberation was the cessation of mental defilements that bind beings to samsara. In later Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, enlightenment was interpreted more broadly as awakening to emptiness, niyat, interdependence, and the boundless activity of compassion, while liberation became inseparable from the altruistic aspiration to free all beings. This essay explores the profound interconnection between enlightenment and liberation across the Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana traditions, examining both their doctrinal foundations and practical implications. By comparing these perspectives, we gain a deeper appreciation of how Buddhist thought unites personal realization with universal freedom, insight with compassion, and wisdom with transformative action. 1. Enlightenment and liberation in early Buddhism. Theravada perspective 1.1 Defining enlightenment bodhi in the Pali Canon. Enlightenment bodhi is closely associated with the awakening of the Buddha himself, particularly his realization under the Bodhi tree in Bodhgayab. Enlightenment here refers to the direct experiential understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the cessation of craving, tahas, the cause of suffering, the nature of dependent, origination, pa-ikasamupta, the impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and non-self anat, of phenomena. Thus, enlightenment in Theravada is fundamentally cognitive and experiential. It is the wisdom panbe that penetrates the reality of existence. 1.2 Defining liberation vimutti. Liberation in Theravada refers to the cessation of defilements, kilesas such as greed, hatred, and delusion. This liberation is twofold: citta vimutti, liberation of mind, freedom from clinging and mental fetters; pan vimutti, liberation through wisdom, the insight that eradicates ignorance. Liberation is concretely expressed as nibbana, the extinguishing of the fires of craving, while enlightenment is the awakening to truth. Liberation is the lived freedom from bondage. 1.3 Relationship between enlightenment and liberation in Theravada. Enlightenment and liberation are two aspects of the same realization. Enlightenment provides the insight into reality, and liberation is the consequence, the unshakable freedom from suffering. The Arahant embodies this union, one who has awakened to truth, bodhi, and is thereby liberated vimutti from rebirth. 2. Enlightenment and liberation in Mahayana Buddhism. 2.1 Expanding the scope of enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhism redefined enlightenment as bodhicitta, the awakening of mind oriented toward the liberation of all beings. Enlightenment is no longer merely personal insight, but the full realization of emptiness, niyat, and interdependent origination, pratitya samuppa, the Proshparamati s. Trask emphasized that enlightenment entails realizing the not nature of phenomena, neither existent nor non-existent, neither permanent nor annihilated. Such wisdom frees the practitioner from grasping at self and dharmas. 2.2 Liberation as universal compassion in Mabhina. Liberation transcends the individual. Attainment of Nibbana. True liberation is inseparable from Karu, compassion, and Upkya, skillful means. A bodhisattva refuses to enter final nerve bay until all beings are liberated, embodying the paradox of being enlightened yet remaining engaged in samsara. For others, thus, while Theravada views liberation as the ultimate cessation of rebirth, Mabhayana presents liberation as a dynamic engagement with the world, rooted in the non-duality of samsara and nirvana, Sen relationship between enlightenment and liberation in Mabhayana thought, enlightenment awakening to emptiness and liberation. Freedom from suffering for all beings are two wings of the Bodhisattva path. One without the other is incomplete. Enlightenment provides the wisdom foundation, while liberation ensures that wisdom is expressed through compassionate action. 3. Enlightenment and liberation in Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism, Sendeyi, Vajrayana est. Unique vision, Vajrayana Buddhism, or Tantric Buddhism, integrates Mabhayana's emphasis on emptiness and compassion, but adds esoteric practices aimed at accelerating the path. Through mantra, visualization, deity yoga, and subtle body practices, Vajrayana claims that one can attain enlightenment and liberation within a single lifetime. Down Sendenar, enlightenment in Vajrayana is seen as the recognition that the ordinary mind is already the enlightened mind, Buddha nature. Rather than striving toward a distant goal, practitioners unveil the innate purity of awareness through transformative practices. 3.3. Liberation in Vajrayana. Liberation here is not merely the cessation of defilements, but the transformation of defilements into wisdom. Desire becomes the wisdom of discernment, anger becomes mirror-like wisdom, ignorance becomes the wisdom of reality. Liberation is not escape, but transmutation. 3.4. Relationship between enlightenment and liberation in Vajrayana. Enlightenment and liberation are immediate and inseparable. By recognizing the inseparability of bliss and emptiness, practitioners realize both wisdom and freedom. Liberation is not leaving samsara, but experiencing samsara as nirvana through awakened perception. 4. Comparative perspectives. Siddharo Veda, enlightenment equals realization of four noble truths. Liberation equals cessation of defilements. Nibbana, relationship. Enlightenment leads directly to liberation. Siddhana, Mabhayana, enlightenment equals realization of emptiness. Bodhisattva, liberation equals universal compassion, freedom for all beings. Relationship. Enlightenment without compassion is incomplete. 4.3. Vajrayana enlightenment equals recognition of innate Buddha nature. Liberation equals transformation of defilements into wisdom. Relationship, enlightenment, and liberation are simultaneous and embodied. 5. Philosophical reflections on the interrelationship. The interplay between enlightenment and liberation reveals a fundamental Buddhist paradox. Enlightenment emphasizes insight into truth. Liberation emphasizes freedom from suffering. Together, they form a holistic path that unites wisdom, project, and compassion. Karu without wisdom, compassion lacks depth. Without compassion, wisdom risks becoming sterile. In this way, enlightenment and liberation are not to separate achievements, but to aspects of one. Awakening. 6. Practical implications for practitioners. 6.1. Theravada practitioner focuses on meditation, vipassana, and samatha, ethical discipline and insight, into impermanence and non-self. Enlightenment and liberation culminate in arahantship. Lildan R. Mobiana, practitioner, cultivates bodhicitta, practices the six perfections, promits, and meditates on emptiness. Enlightenment blossoms into universal liberation through compassionate vows. Lode Sen, Vajrayana, practitioner, engages in tantric practices, deity yoga, and guru devotion. Enlightenment is recognized in the present moment, and liberation is embodied through tantric realization. Conclusion: across Buddhist traditions, enlightenment and liberation are inseparable dimensions of awakening. Whether conceived as the wisdom of the arahant, the compassion of the bodhisattva, or the immediacy of tantric realization, both represent the deepest aspirations of the Buddhist path. While the terms may vary in nuance, their union reflects the heart of the Dharma: to awaken fully and to be free, not only for oneself, but for the benefit of all beings. In Theravada, enlightenment leads to liberation through insight into the Four Noble Truths. In Mahayana, enlightenment blossoms as emptiness and compassion, leading to universal liberation. In Vajrayana, enlightenment and liberation are unveiled as the inherent nature of mind itself. Thus, across traditions, enlightenment and liberation stand as two faces of the same ultimate reality, the realization of truth and the freedom it brings.